Hello, and welcome to this virtual walking tour as part of ULI's Environmental, Social, and Governance Symposium. I'm Linda Weichel, Principal of Weichel Consulting Impact Advisory Services, and I will be your guide for this tour. At this stop, we'll be learning about the Indigenous Hub that's under development in the West Don Lands. I'll be interviewing Janine Manning, who's the Manager, Annual Giving and Donor Relations, Anishinaabe Health Foundation. The 2.4-acre Indigenous Hub will span an entire city block at Front and Cherry Streets in the West Don Lands. The hub will include the new home of Anishinaabe Health Toronto, the Misway Beak Training Institute, a childcare and family center, mixed-use condo and rental buildings, and the restored Canary Heritage Building. The developers are Dream, Kilmer, and Tricon Residential. The site will be a gathering place for Indigenous people from across Turtle Island and a home to support the reclamation of culture and identity. It's also worth noting that Indigenous Hub took home the award for Best New Community Planned Under Development at the recent annual awards for the Industry Association Build. So welcome, Janine.
Thank you. It sounds like you covered it all, so.
There's more to say. I am quite sure about that.
Yes, there is.
So let's start with just setting the stage. If you can briefly describe the Indigenous Hub, your plans for it, and what it's going to be contributing and what its significance is to the Indigenous community and the city as a whole.
Yeah, for sure. This is such an exciting question, almost as exciting as the build. So the Indigenous Hub, it's going to be the first of its kind from the ground up build for an Indigenous organization in Toronto, which is a huge, huge undertaking, especially for a community health center. So the vision for the place, it'll be a space for Indigenous people and community members. So not just to access health and wellness services at the health center, but for social purposes. Also, the site will be offering rental housing in the Canary historical restaurant. There will be retail space. Hopefully we can attract a restaurateur to come in. And of course, there's going to be Indigenous landscaping. And so this place is going to be a place for cultural, social, and also eventually ceremonial purposes for the Indigenous community in Toronto. The capital project itself for the health center was the vision of Joe Hester, who is the executive director of the Anishinaabe Health Toronto. He's been advocating and working towards this new home for the center for 2 decades now. So Anishinaabe Health Toronto started out as one location in the mid-80s, and it was housed in a former bank. And it has since grown to 3 locations and sees over 33,000 visitors annually. So the time for a new home is long overdue, but there was struggle in finding the land, and then of course the capital needed to build upon the land. So in 2014, the province of Ontario signed over 2.4 acres of land, as you mentioned, in the West Don Lands for the build itself. However, this was quite a large amount of land, considering the center alone only needed, now that the plans have gone through, 0.7 acres. So Joe had to go back to his advocacy role and get to work and build further partnerships necessary from the corporate sector to co-develop the site. And so in 2017 he did just that with Tricon and Dream. And yeah, we are here now. We've broken ground in January, and in June. It was National Indigenous Peoples Day that we broke ground for the new site. So that's kind of the history to now. Oh yeah, I did remember one corporate partner. I don't want to forget them, was the Kilmore Group. So that's the history to this point. And there's so much more to come. Yeah, so.
That's amazing, Janine. And it is a really interesting partnership model with government at various levels and the private sector. Can you share some of the challenges or opportunities that have come about through this kind of partnership?
Sure. So it's a public private kind of partnership model. We're not only the only Indigenous organization on the site, but neighboring the health center is the Miswebe Training Institute. So they'll be serving as the employment and training partner. And their new building will offer a hands-on carpentry, workshopping, tutoring classes, a business incubator, and multi-purpose training spaces. But more exciting, I think, is the Child Care and Family Center that's going to be supported by the City of Toronto. And this health center itself, of course, is getting funding from the health, the governmental health sector. So it's quite exciting that Miswebe Aboriginal and Training Employment will be able to double their physical space and support up to 1,000 Indigenous people to secure jobs annually. So this kind of adds to the health and wellness of Indigenous folks. And not only concentrating on their physical, mental, and spiritual health, but their financial health. And part of the uniqueness, I think, of the project is that we have a partnership with two Rowe architects, and they served as the design consultant on the entire project. And they developed 8 Indigenous guidelines to ensure all aspects of the hub, so all buildings honored Indigenous knowledge, history, and values. And this includes the materials, paying attention to detail to the craftsmanship, directionality, movement of the sun, amongst many other things. We're very excited about the landscaping, which was fundraised and solely supported by Indigenous people of our community. And so it will contain all our sacred medicines, so a sacred medicine garden, and we'll be installing benches for folks to represent our 7 sacred teachers. So there's a lot of pride and ownership that comes to the landscaping space with that fundraising initiative. And I think for me, I was born and raised in Toronto, and we live in a city that is rich in ethnic enclaves. And to date, there's never really been an officially recognized Indigenous neighborhood per se, but rather pockets of community activity built around organizations that have sprung up from existing buildings that had previously existed, but not built for our community needs. So that's why it's really exciting that this is from the ground up built for Indigenous community with Indigenous community design principles and, collaboration. So the new community health center itself will open in late 2022, and then the remainder of the buildings should be completed by 2024.
That's incredible, Janine. And I think that as you've given some examples, there are so many ways that you can be, or that developers and builders can be welcoming Indigenous perspective, incorporating ways of doing things. If you had one message for the real estate and development industry, both the private sector and the public, what would you want to say to them?
So I think the messaging comes from the challenges and the solutions that we faced and came up with. And it was the biggest challenge we had was coming up with capital dollars and the lack of capital dollars for projects in the Indigenous community. So like mentioned before, we created this public-private partnership. And then we also negotiated long-term leases on the land that will create revenue streams to financially support the hub and to maintain its 7 generations into the future. And this is something that is grounded in Indigenous worldviews, where, you know, we're thinking about the ancestors we're going to be and what are we leaving behind for the next generations, whether they're our children or our nieces and nephews or you know, fellow community members. And so the one message we would like to put out there is to think in that way, to think 7 generations ahead. And what is the legacy? What do you want your legacy to be? What kind of world do you want to leave for those future generations? From our community context, we'd say listen to Indigenous climate activists, support Indigenous land stewardship, include local communities and people in your planning, diversify employment and include Indigenous people and apprentices, plant Indigenous gardens and species, and of course, invest in, improve and promote public transportation. So that's, I think, you know, our message for the future and for those who are responsible for building it.
Those are great and very tangible examples of how things can be done with the community in mind. And so I want to thank you so much, Janine, for sharing your perspective. And I hope everyone will take this away and be inspired to do development differently going forward.
Miigwech, thank you for this opportunity, Linda.
Thank you.